The anime begins with a group of students facing off on the grounds of an academy. At the forefront are their leaders, a blonde girl named Juliet Persia, and the protagonist named Romeo Inuzuka. She belongs to the faction called the White Cats, who are Western nobles, and he belongs to the Black Dogs, barbarians from Tua. Both Persia and the protagonist come face to face and decide it's time to fight to see which school faction is superior to the other. Thus, the students from both sides start fighting among themselves, leaving the leaders in the middle of the chaos. When the protagonist is about to confront Persia, his companion Hasuki asks if he needs help, but he tells her he will fight completely alone. The two leaders lunge at each other while the others fight around them, as we learn how Dahlia Academy works, a place where two types of students coexist during classes. However, for the rest of the day, they constantly fight to see which faction is better. Back in the fight, the protagonist avoids hitting Persia and she lands on the ground, somewhat confused for not having been attacked. At that moment, Scott, a boy with glasses from her faction, appears, grabs her hand and asks her to let him fight for her. Seeing this, the protagonist punches Scott in the face and tells him that if it's his job to protect her, he should lock her in the dorms. But Persia defends the boy by also punching the protagonist in the face and rescuing Scott in her arms. Persia asks the protagonist to fight without holding back, and he replies that he can't do that to a girl. Suddenly, a girl with long pink hair, who is a prefect of the White Cats, interrupts. She tells them they cannot fight on the academy campus, and the protagonist replies that they are not obliged to coexist with her faction. But the prefect remains calm and responds that she will then speak with the Black Dogs delegate. At that moment, all the students are astonished by what she just said, and the protagonist looks at the girl angrily as she walks away. Then Persia says that's enough for today and asks her group to withdraw. Still, Scott takes the opportunity to mock the protagonist before leaving. We then see the protagonist with Husky on the ground, and she responds to Scott by insulting him and saying that it doesn't affect her at all. But the protagonist seems worried and scared by the prefect's threat and doesn't answer Hasuki. When everyone leaves, we see the Black Dogs gathered in class, lamenting not continuing the fight and saying that once the delegates have their eyes on you, you must stop fighting and obey. They all tell the protagonist they are counting on him, but he ignores everyone because he is not in a good mood. Hasuki approaches him and asks flirtatiously if he needs her to comfort him, which clearly makes the other male students jealous and annoys the girls in the class. But when she clarifies she means nothing perverted, he is already left with that thought in mind. Outside, we see the protagonist punching a column and whining, wondering what he can do about all this. We are told that the fight between the two groups has existed since elementary school, and that he has always been up against Persia. But suddenly, the protagonist, after all these years with Persia, shows that he has actually always been in love with her. For this reason, he couldn't attack her earlier, and his only concern is keeping other boys away from her, especially Scott. So he starts fantasizing about confessing to Persia and imagining the best way to do it. But he gets embarrassed and punches a column again. Here we realize the protagonist is a bit of a simp and decides the best thing to do would be to go exploring and ends up spying on Persia's group. She is fighting with wooden swords against some students and defeats one with no problem. Afterwards, Scott approaches her, offers her his towel to cool down, and congratulates her on how strong she is. But Persia replies that she still has a lot to improve and wants to be strong enough to change the world and not be underestimated. However, at this moment, she remembers how the protagonist didn't want to attack her that morning and gets so angry she tears the towel in two. When he sees this, the protagonist gets scared and thinks she is really furious with him and that he doesn't have the slightest chance of winning her over. Just then, some White Cat students appear with 3 children in tow and Persia comes out to meet them. Persia's allies tell her they have caught these elementary school students from the Black Dogs painting graffiti on the group's houses. The children respond that another Black Dog child mocked them and called them weak, so they wanted to prove they weren't. Then one of the children yells at Persia, and a White Cat student hits the child to make him show respect to their queen. When the child falls to the ground, his nose starts bleeding from the other student's blow, and Persia tells him that it's true they are weak. At this, the child lunges at her to attack, but he doesn't harm her at all, and she smiles and calms the little one down a bit. Persia then tells him that he is capable of being strong, to wipe his nose, and to leave. Although the other White Cats reproach Persia for how she treats the boy, she replies that they should demand more of themselves, and not get carried away by such nonsense. The protagonist had moved forward when he thought she was going to attack the children and suddenly finds everyone staring at him intently. Persia thinks he is there to fight and prepares herself, but he gets nervous and says he just wanted to complain. Then he runs away, which makes Persia angry with him again because she thinks he is mocking her like he did this morning, and the others try to calm her down a little. Once the protagonist is away, we see a group of black dogs watching Persia and the other white cats from a distance, and the white cats are also watching them. It's 3 rebellious black dogs named Maru, Tosa, and Kohitsuji. Maru plays with a utility knife, extending and retracting the blade while talking about the protagonist, and we learn that he believes they are in this situation with the white cats because of him not being tough enough. So they plan to attack Persia's group as they head to the dorms to avoid being easily discovered. Shortly after, Tosa and Kohitsuji pursue Persia, who has separated from the group and is walking alone through a garden. But the students give themselves away by not being able to see anything with the bags on their heads, and she defends herself. They both try to attack her with a bat and a piece of iron, but Persia defeats them with a kick and calls them cowards for being 2 against 1. At that moment, Maru appears from the bushes and sprays the girl's eyes with pepper spray, leaving her nearly blind. Then one of the students grabs and immobilizes her, and Maru tears her clothes with the previous weapon until she is left in her underwear. Seeing this, the protagonist rushes to save her, goes through a bush with her to get her out of there, and protects her from the group. However, the others think the protagonist wants to take all the credit for finishing off the leader of the white cats. Once on the other side of the bush, the protagonist realizes he is on top of Persia and she is half naked. The protagonist sees that she is crying and gets off her. She then moves away and looks at him, frightened, with tears still in her eyes. He tries to explain, but the girl runs away, and the protagonist lies down, thinking he has just ruined any chance with her. A while later, he returns to the black dog's house and is met by the 3 students from before, who laugh about him stealing their prey. The protagonist responds by punching all 3 of them, telling them they have caused a big problem for themselves. Then, an arrow with a letter from Persia tied to it lands on one of the students' heads. In the note, she asks the protagonist to meet her at the academy's fountain in a little while, and he clearly decides to go. When he arrives, he finds Persia in front of the fountain with a sword in each hand, and she confronts him. The girl asks if he was attacking her or trying to save her before. If it was the former, they would fight right there to the death. But if it was the latter, she wanted to know why he was helping her if they had always been enemies. The protagonist thinks of something to say to avoid confessing his true feelings and deceive her. But at that moment, Persia starts crying again and tells him that he always avoids fighting her and treats her as if she were weak. After this, we see a memory of them as children, fighting as usual in front of other kids. The teachers separated them, and they were later scolded by their guardians. She reminds him that they were very hard on Persia for being the only daughter of the Count of Persia, always telling her not to get scars or lose her composure in front of other children. There, the protagonist realizes that Persia wanted to be strong so as not to lose to men, intelligent so as not to be looked down upon, and influential so her orders would not be disobeyed, all to change the world for the better. So the protagonist finally understands that by wanting to protect her and treating her differently because he was in love, he was actually hurting her. Therefore, he tells her he challenges her to a duel and will fight her without holding back, and this time he will give it his all to win. She thanks him and throws him a practice sword to fight with, so the protagonist decides to stop doing things halfway. They both lunge at each other and clash their swords with force, but at that moment, the protagonist confesses his love to Persia, and she blushes completely. He continues to attack while confessing his feelings, and she questions them because they have always been enemies. Blow after blow, the protagonist tells her he has always loved her and used to wonder what would happen if he gave up, or wished they had been born in the same country to be together on the same side. But Persia keeps attacking until she makes him fall into the fountain. She then approaches the protagonist in the water and tells him he's an idiot and that such an ambitious plan couldn't be his idea, although he is a bit frustrated by her words. Persia ends up agreeing to date him as long as he proves he can change the world, and the protagonist asks her to repeat that, as he clearly had a bit of water in his ears. Persia, very embarrassed, tells him again that she will go out with him, and the protagonist starts crying with emotion because he didn't think his girl would accept. In fact, he thought Persia hated him because she replies that she never said anything like that. At this, the protagonist asks if she likes him, but Persia says she doesn't know and that they must date in secret. So the two leaders begin to date as secret lovers behind the entire academy's back. Sometime later, the black dogs and the white cats face off again on campus, especially Scott and Hasuki. But when they both offer help to their leaders, they realize they are nowhere to be found in the fight. In reality, the protagonist has escaped with Persia because he wants to get to know her better instead of fighting. She starts telling him useless facts like her vision level, but he replies that's not what he meant. At that, Persia says that if they're not going to talk about anything important, she'd rather leave, and he replies that's very cold of her. In his mind, what couples do is hold hands and walk around while calling each other cute nicknames. Suddenly, Husky appears and asks the protagonist if he needs help, but he grabs Persia by the head and lifts her off the ground as if they were fighting. Persia tells him not to do that because it hurts and gives him a flying kick to the face that leaves him on the ground. Then she leaves and the protagonist is left unconscious on the ground, accompanied by a very worried Husky. A while later, in the White Cat's locker room, a student asks Persia if she really defeated the protagonist, and when she confirms it, the girl replies that she would love to be like her, but Persia becomes sad. Once all the students have left, Persia looks at some flowers in the room and remembers her father. When she was little, she once brought him a bouquet of flowers she had picked herself from the garden. But her father slapped the gift away and told her not to bother with unimportant things. Right after that, Persia hears the protagonist's voice calling her and realizes he is at the locker room window. She starts calling him a pervert, but the protagonist says he climbed up there to apologize for what happened earlier and to give her a gift, as he had been asking two little girls who told him that lovers give each other a rosary as a sign of love in the West. But when he asks her to accept it, Scott yells at him from the other window because he was also there watching everything. It seems Scott lunges to catch the protagonist, and they both fall several stories to the ground while Persia watches in fear. When the protagonist wakes up, he is lying on Husky's lap in the black dog's house. His companion tells him that Persia threw him from the roof and that she is an evil girl, so they have gone after her. The protagonist tries to get up and help, but Husky grabs him and tells him to stay calm, that she would be very happy if he stayed like that and let her take care of him day by day. But when she looks again, he has escaped, and Hasuki is hugging Gyotaro, the black dog of the house where her group lives. Later, the protagonist finds Persia walking on campus and shouts her name. At first, she is happy to see him, but then she runs away from him. He asks what's wrong when he realizes a group of black dogs has appeared behind them, ready to catch Persia to get revenge for throwing their leader from the roof. Scott appears there with some white cats and threatens the protagonist, but he wants to go after Persia. Instead of fighting, the two groups start attacking each other, and the protagonist tries to stop them, but only gets kicked to the ground. After this, he gets tired and clenches his fist in frustration, remembering that Persia asked him to be able to change the world to be with her. Unfortunately, at that moment, part of the rosary he was holding to give to her fills with rage. He then walks to a statue, tears it out, and starts attacking all the students with it, including those from his own faction. Seeing this, everyone runs because they think he has gone completely crazy, and in the end, the protagonist ends the fight with brute force. That same night, the protagonist ends up punished, pulling weeds by a lake for breaking the Academy statue. But when he is about to throw the rosary into the water, Persia appears behind him and tells him he shouldn't throw anything into the lake. He apologizes for breaking her gift and says he will buy a better one for her later, but she asks him to take a boat ride instead. When they are both sailing, he asks if it's okay because they might be seen, but she tells him not to worry. Then Persia asks if what he wanted to give her is the rosary in his pocket and says he can just throw it away. But then she asks him to close his eyes, and when he opens them again, Persia is very close to him, putting something around his neck. The protagonist blushes and asks how she fixed the rosary, but she replies that the one around his neck is hers, as everyone from her country has one they use for daily prayer, and she clearly wants to give it to him. The protagonist replies that he can't accept it, but she tells him that in the West, a rosary is given as a good luck charm to a special person, and she has used this one daily for prayer because her mother gave it to her when she entered the academy, and it is her most valuable possession. So that's why she is giving it to him, as he is slowly becoming her sweetheart. The protagonist blushes, but tells her that something like that should be hers, because it's the thought that counts, and it should belong to her. At this, Persia gets a little crazy and annoyed by his words and says she's going home. But he tries to stop her from getting angry like a toxic Latina girl. And by standing up in the boat, he ends up falling into the lake and asks for help. But she just mocks him, telling him to calm down and starts rowing away. The next day, the two factions are preparing for a school trip. At the departure point, the protagonist is waiting for someone when Hasuki appears and asks to go out together in town. But he tells her he can't because he already has plans with someone, which clearly surprises his friend. Suddenly, a small student in a black dog's uniform appears, and the protagonist leaves with him. Hasuki misinterprets this and thinks that perhaps the protagonist is interested in boys, especially cute ones like the one she saw. Later we discover that this boy is actually Persia, disguised as a black dog boy, so she can go out with the protagonist in town. He convinced her to have a private meeting to talk in the church's confessional, and offered her the disguise there. Although she initially refused to do such a thing to have a date with him, she ended up giving in because she felt sorry for him when he cried. As they walk across campus, Scott appears, running towards them, shouting Persia's name, and they both get scared. But it turns out Scott had only recognized her perfume without realizing the person in disguise was her. Even so, another group of boys from the Black Dogs approaches the protagonist and Persia and asks who the new kid is, to which the protagonist replies that he is a relative of his named Julio. However, seeing how adorable he is, everyone wants to get close to him. Suddenly, many students, both boys and girls, appear, asking Julio out or to be his friend, as it seems Julio himself is becoming quite popular. Later in town, Persia tells the protagonist that the place arose from the relationship between Tua and the Westerners, but now the situation is tense between the two sides, although she hopes this will change in the future. Suddenly, the protagonist turns and yells at a group of black dogs to stop following them, to which they reply that they also want to be with Julio. The protagonist automatically gets angry, telling them they have to get through him first. This does nothing but anger these students, who end up stomping on the protagonist on the ground. Then, a couple of girls approach Persia disguised as Julio and tell her that the protagonist is really lively today and it's rare to see him like this. She asks what they mean, and the students reply that he is usually quiet and has a "don't come near me" aura. In the end, throughout the entire walk, the group follows the protagonist and Persia, ruining their plans for the perfect date they had planned for that day alone. So in the end, they can't buy the new rosary with them around, nor can he take her to a restaurant with a sea view to eat. At that moment, we see a girl with short, silver hair from the White Cats observing them while drinking tea. The girl says she hates the black dogs because they are very noisy and notices Julio. When she sees the young man, she seems to want to say something, but he quickly leaves with the group to find a place to eat, so they end up in a ramen shop all together. Persia loves this, as she has never tried anything so spicy. However, since she doesn't know how to use chopsticks, she ends up spilling the ramen on her pants. The protagonist tries to take them off before she gets burned, but in doing so, he reveals her underwear, and she hits him. A while later, the group ends up at an amusement park, and the protagonist is very annoyed because it's almost time to go back. Just then, he sees a haunted house and drags Persia there, holding her hand. But when they go inside, she gets very scared and clings to the protagonist. Then an actor dressed as a zombie appears, and Persia hits him and runs away. Although the protagonist runs after her, he can't see her when he comes out of the attraction, and the other students tell him that Julio went the other way. Shortly after, the protagonist arrives at a path by the sea and thinks that perhaps Persia got angry about the date and left. But just then, Maru, Tosa, and Kohitsuji appear to get revenge for what he did the other night. With a kick, Maru throws the protagonist into the sea and mocks him upon seeing that he can't swim at all. Then he steps on his head and tells him that if he doesn't swim, he'll end up drowning. But at that moment, Persia appears disguised as Julio. The three students mess with him, saying they've never seen him at the academy and that they're just joking with the protagonist. Maru tries to hit Persia, underestimating her for looking like a young boy, and she dodges his attack and returns a stronger one. While telling him she's not a boy, Maru ends up flying through the air until he hits the ground and lies there motionless. In the afternoon, back at the academy, Persia and the protagonist talk about what happened on top of a large tower. He thanks her for saving him and tells her he thought she was angry about their disastrous date. But she replies that she went to the bathroom because the wig was getting too itchy, and then she found him. With that, Persia asks him what his definition of a date is and tells him that for her, it's about getting to know the other person better. Since she knows he's usually sad and quiet, she says that day she got to know a new side of him and is very happy. The date was a complete success, and Persia tells him she wants to have another one soon. The protagonist automatically gets excited, and just then, Scott appears, realizing that the protagonist is pretending to fight with Persia, and she hits him, making Scott think it was a secret enemy attack. Sometime later, the protagonist asks Persia to keep her schedule free in 3 days because it will be their 1-month anniversary and he wants to celebrate. She replies that she doesn't know if she can and that sooner or later they will either break up or continue like this. So there's no need to remember dates because this will clearly end at some point. The protagonist gets upset and says he will just celebrate it alone then, at which Persia sees he's in a bad mood and clearly tries to cheer him up. She approaches him and tells him that in 3 days they will be free to celebrate together. However, as they were about to shake hands on it, Scott and Hasuki appear running because there's an emergency at the academy, and the protagonist again pretends to be fighting with Persia. The others tell him that the Princess of the West is arriving at the school and that everyone must be there to receive her. Later, we see the girl from the school trip who was drinking tea, named Princess Char, heading to the school in a luxurious car. She orders all the students to be there to receive her and asks the driver to drop her off right there. While the students prepare to receive the princess with a red carpet and introduce her to everyone, Char greets them all and annoyingly asks Scott to tell her a joke, though if it's boring, she'll hit him. Before he can finish, she punches him in the face and tells him that he's boring by default. Then Persia appears and greets the tyrant princess of the West. Char approaches her and says she looks like a little doll. Also, unseen by the others, Char strokes Persia's hair and then grabs it forcefully, hurting her. When she asks her to stop, Char notices that the black dogs have not come to pay their respects. So they head towards the protagonist, and he says they are not like everyone else, but he defends himself by saying they do not serve the cats. Char moves forward, and the protagonist prepares to attack. But at that moment, the princess tells him she knows he's dating Persia. The protagonist freezes completely upon hearing this, and the princess whispers to him that she even has a photo of her in the Julio disguise. The other students don't understand why the protagonist has stopped, but they all keep looking at him without hearing what's being said in a low voice. The protagonist falls to the ground, and Char approaches him smiling, ordering him to be her faithful dog if he wants her to keep his secret. Although this greatly annoys him, the protagonist ends up giving in to her blackmail and massages her shoulders. The others think he has been captivated by the princess's large breasts, but Persia looks at him with disappointment. At that, Husky lunges at the protagonist and starts hitting him for obeying the princess of the enemy faction. Later, we see the protagonist alone with Char, and she tells him he has to come to her whenever she blows her whistle. But since he looks displeased, the princess says she will then go and show the photo to the others. However, the protagonist begs her to let it go and not to tell anyone, because Toa and the West are having many problems at the moment. Char replies that if they find out about his relationship with Persia, he will lose everything he has, and that she has always wanted a faithful dog. At this, the protagonist remembers Persia's words and thinks that if it were discovered they are lovers, she wouldn't be able to fulfill her dream. Shortly after, the protagonist is sitting in the garden and hears Persia calling him secretly. He asks what's wrong, and she replies that he should be the one asking that first, what's with his behavior with Char. But just then, the whistle blows, and the protagonist must go see what the princess needs. As he runs towards her, he tells Persia that he will explain everything later, so she should wait for him. When he answers the call, Char demands that the protagonist carry her to her residence on all fours like a dog. But he asks if it wouldn't be faster to carry her normally, to which she replies that dogs don't do that, and blackmails him again with showing the photo if he doesn't hurry up and carry her. So, he clearly starts running like a dog with her on his back. A while later, the protagonist returns to Persia, walking on all fours, and when she asks what he's doing, he can't explain because the princess's whistle blows again. This time, she asks him to go hunt a deer in the nearby forest, and he does. By nightfall, Persia is still waiting for the protagonist when he appears from the bushes, injured by the deer. Suddenly, the whistle blows again, and he thinks about how much Char is enjoying this. And what will he do in 3 days if this continues? Persia asks if that whistle has to do with him and begs him to please tell her what is happening right now. But the protagonist replies that he won't let her fail and that he has to go. Then Persia pats him on the back and tells him that he is invincible and to do what he has to do, but not to leave her alone on their date in 3 days. The protagonist musters his courage and answers Char's call, who only wanted him to come so she could see his face and annoy him. The princess asks if he's upset about her request, and the protagonist responds with a smile that her wishes are his commands. The rest of the students understand absolutely nothing, and some feel disappointed by the protagonist's actions. But he has a plan in mind, to pretend to be a faithful and submissive dog to discover her weakness and return the blackmail soon. That night, when he returns to the black dog's house, the protagonist finds his belongings outside. The group tells him they don't want a servant of the white cats there, and that they normally would have already beaten him up for this. But out of respect for Hasuki, who has clearly defended him faithfully, they are only going to expel him from the house. When the group leaves, the protagonist sees Hasuki at the dormitory window. He smiles at her, grateful for her defense, and leaves. The next morning, the protagonist once again fulfills all of Char's whims, from feeding her to getting into fights for her. Later, while carrying her on his back like a dog again, the princess suddenly asks him to turn around quickly. He realizes she asked him to stop because Persia was walking past them. And looking at the expression on Char's face, it has changed upon seeing the leader of the white cats. Later that night, we see that Persia will finally be sharing a room with the princess, something Char is not very happy about. The next day, the protagonist and Persia meet alone again, and he asks her for information about the princess. Persia replies that they are childhood friends and have always been together, but upon returning this year, she seems like a different person. The whistle blows again, and the protagonist prepares to answer the call, but Persia pinches his hand to stop him. Realizing that she is also worried, the protagonist decides to put an end to everything before their date the next day. A while later, over the academy's PA system, someone asks the princess to go to the principal's office, but it was a fake message from the protagonist so he could sneak into her dorm and investigate how he can blackmail her back. At that moment, Char opens the room door, thinking that if that trap would really work for him to sneak in, but when she enters, she finds no one there and starts playing hide and seek with the protagonist. Char looks under the bed and in the closet, but doesn't find him. Then she looks at the mirror in her room and gets scared. It turns out the protagonist finds a secret room where Char keeps a ton of photos of Persia everywhere. He explains that he found this secret door by chance, mistaking the mirror for a window, and tells her that what's really happening is that she is in love with Persia and got jealous that they are dating. When the protagonist threatens to show the photos, Char lunges at him and begs him, crying, not to say anything. Then Char confesses that she loves Persia because she's the only one who cares about her, and they have always been together. Through tears, the princess asks him not to take her away and confesses she doesn't understand how she can be with someone like him. Just then, we hear Persia's voice on the other side of the door because she needs to get into the room to get ready. Char sits on the floor crying, saying she doesn't want her to discover her true feelings and that it's useless to try to hide the photos. But the protagonist asks her to distract her friend, so Char opens the door and blocks Persia's way. She asks if there's anyone else in the room, but Char denies it, and she suggests they talk outside instead. Even so, Persia manages to get in and finds the room clear, with no trace of the scattered photos. Afterward, Persia gets ready for the date, and Char tells her she was afraid they wouldn't meet again, but Persia replies that she will never leave her best friend and that they will always be together. At this, Char gets emotional about what her friend called her and asks that only she call her Char, nothing more. A while later, Persia leaves, and the protagonist comes out of the secret room where he was hiding with the photos. Char asks him if he stole any photos from her collection, and he pretends to be innocent by whistling a little. After this, the protagonist tells her he won't reveal her secret because that way he can continue to blackmail her. And Char replies that Persia is in danger as long as she is with him, so she will never approve of this relationship. Besides, she has to maintain her role as the tyrant princess of the West and has no intention of treating him well at all. In another moment, we see a part of the protagonist's past where he is a child and fights with the other kids in his class. He says he doesn't need friends, and suddenly a girl with glasses appears, looking at him from the other side, surprised that everyone was afraid of him. Back in the present, we find the students of the Black Dogs preparing for the exam war against the others. The protagonist encourages his classmates to surpass the White Cats, and they seem very determined to crush them. It's a 3-day intensive study camp that lasts until a student gives up from exhaustion. While everyone prepares, the protagonist watches them with Persia, who has once again disguised herself as Julio. She asks him if he asked for her help because he knows they won't see each other for 3 days, and he gets nervous. Suddenly, Hasuki appears at the door with a megaphone, addressing the students, and Persia asks the protagonist who she is, but Hasuki hears them and throws a book at her head. Persia asks her to be quiet. Then the protagonist tells Hasuki that Julio has the same grades as them and wants to participate in the camp, to which Hasuki agrees because her camp doesn't turn anyone away. Next, everyone takes a test that Hasuki prepares, but the protagonist tries to surprise Persia but falls asleep as soon as he starts, and Hasuki punishes him several times. Then Persia looks to the side and sees Maru using a phone to cheat on the exam, to which she replies that it's forbidden. Maru ends up breaking the phone to prove he doesn't need it, and his two friends treat the exam as a joke. While Hasuki scolds him, the protagonist explains to Persia that Hasuki cares about all of them and wants to prevent them from leaving the academy. That's why she changes so much when she wears her glasses and starts acting like a mature and demanding teacher. When night falls, the protagonist accompanies Persia to a sewer so she can return to the White Cat's house. She tells him they won't be able to see each other until the exams are over, and that he's not the only one who will feel lonely during that time. But before he can answer, she disappears underground, and at that exact moment, Hasuki comes running towards him. His friend says she was looking for him because he had disappeared, and that he's been acting very strange lately with the char thing and his getaways. The protagonist replies there's nothing to worry about, but Hasuki says she thinks he's hiding something and then says goodbye. Once she's gone, Char appears and teases the protagonist, telling him he's very reckless for sneaking Persia into the enemy's house. Then Char warns him that Hasuki shouldn't find out about their relationship, and he replies that he trusts her. This doesn't convince Char, who asks why, if they are such good friends, he hasn't told her anything about Persia. The princess immediately disappears down the sewer as well, and the protagonist is left thinking that he can't tell Hasuki anything because she loves her group too much. And then sadly, they would no longer be friends. Later, Maru visits Hasuki while she's preparing the exams and asks her why she's doing all this. When she replies that she's doing it for the group, Maru tells her not to lie because he knows she's doing it for the protagonist, and Hasuki gets embarrassed. He then tells her it's foolish to do all this for a boy like him and leaves. The protagonist was listening to all this from the doorway and decides to go in and talk to his friend. When Hasuki sees the protagonist, she gets very nervous and asks if he heard what she was talking about with Maru. He says yes and asks her why she does so many things for him, to which she replies it's because she loves him. Upon this confession, the protagonist decides it's time to tell her the truth and asks her to please listen. He then takes out the rosary from his neck and tells her he's dating Persia and cannot return her love. But when Hasuki finds out what he's done, she grabs a sword and tells him he must die according to the Black Dog's code of honor. So she starts chasing him down the hallways to try and hunt him down. At that point, the protagonist runs into Tosa and Kohitsuji, who were passing by. And Hasuki tries to catch the protagonist, but only manages to cut the boy's clothes. And he escapes by breaking a window, pursued by his former friend. Hearing the commotion, Maru peeks into the hallway, and when he sees his naked friends next to the broken window, he locks himself back in his room. Later, Persia sees the protagonist being chased by Hasuki through the window and goes out to look for them in the forest, where she finds the protagonist up a tree. He tells her everything that happened, but she finds them right away. Once cornered, Hasuki attacks the protagonist, who dodges and accidentally attacks over Persia. This angers Hasuki even more, and she starts attacking both of them until Char appears and saves Persia, while the protagonist grabs the other girl. There, Persia finds out that Char also knew about her and the protagonist, and she says she's only there to punish her lover for letting their relationship be known by more people. Attacked from both sides, the protagonist flees with Persia in his arms. They suddenly reach a ravine with a river below and are forced to stop. The protagonist feels useless for not being able to change the world or protect Persia, but she tells him that's not true, as he changed her heart the day they confronted each other at the fountain, and he declared his feelings for her. Then Hasuki and Char appear, ready to attack, but the protagonist decides to face what he's done and receive the punishment of the sword. In the end, he lets Hasuki hit him on the head and tells her that no matter what happens, he wants to remain her friend. The sword turns out to be fake and only gives him a small bleeding cut on his forehead. But at that moment, a piece of earth breaks off behind them and Persia falls down the ravine. The protagonist jumps without thinking to save her, followed by Char and Hasuki, and as he holds her in midair, he remembers he can't swim. The four of them fall into the water and everything becomes very blurry. A while later, the protagonist wakes up thanks to Hasuki, who has clearly saved him. He asks where Persia is, and she replies that she is fine on the other side of the river with Char, who took care of saving her. He asks Hasuki if she saved him, but she responds by calling him an idiot and asking why he jumped if he can't swim. The protagonist answers that he doesn't know why he did it. He simply wanted to save Persia. Then Hasuki realizes that he sees the leader of the White Cats in the same way she sees the protagonist. So Hasuki yells at him while crying that he is a traitor, that she hates him, and that things can't go on as if nothing happened after this. At this, the protagonist just lets her vent, grabs her and tells her he knows all of that is unnecessary. The next morning, the protagonist confirms that Hasuki hasn't told anyone about them, but suddenly she shouts at him with a megaphone nearby. She tells him that the prep camp isn't over yet and that if he wants to maintain their friendship, he should hurry up. Then she threatens to hit him if he tries anything romantic with Persia in her presence, and he follows his friend's orders. Sometime later, the Black Dogs group is training for the sports festival against the White Cats, while the protagonist and Persia are in a warehouse near the track where the others are running. He pins Persia against the wall and tells her he needs something from her, because they've been dating for a while. But Persia misunderstands the message and pushes him away, calling him an animal. The protagonist then replies that he just wanted a home-cooked meal prepared by her and asks what on earth she was thinking. Persia responds by hitting him and screaming so loudly that some students stop to look towards the warehouse, very confused. The next morning, we see Persia trying to prepare lunch for the protagonist, but she's having some trouble in the kitchen. Everything is turning into a disaster, and the cook has to help her fix some accidents she has caused. Finally, it seems Persia succeeds and arranges to meet the protagonist in a stable at the academy to give him the food she has prepared. She shows him the food basket, and it seems there's something she doesn't want to tell him about how she got it. Then she tells him to open his mouth because she will feed him, but the protagonist ends up biting Char's shoe, who appears there jealous because Persia cooked for the protagonist instead of her and steals the lunch basket. However, as she flees through the trees, her uniform gets caught on a branch, exposing her bra, and the basket goes flying. Coincidentally, Scott was training, and the basket lands on his head. Then, seeing Persia running towards him, he thinks she has prepared lunch for them to have together because she saw him training very hard, and it's a reward or something for him. Suddenly, the protagonist appears and steals the basket back with a swipe. They both fight over Persia's lunch, and Scott confesses that she pulled him out of a bad path back in the day, so he must protect this basket that he intends to steal from his beloved. But the protagonist counterattacks, and the basket is sent flying again towards the pig pen. He dives for the food to save it before it falls, but then all the pigs eat it before he can clearly taste it or do anything. When the pigs finish all the food, the protagonist and Scott lament having lost Persia's lunch. At that, Char sees that Scott is crying for being unable to protect even his friend's food and decides to take him away. The protagonist apologizes to Persia, but she apologizes too and confesses that the lunch wasn't hers. She explains that she has never cooked and isn't good at it. So she asks the cook to prepare the food for her so as not to disappoint him. Still, she offers him some cookies she made herself, although they are burnt and look quite horrible. He accepts them happily and eats them, though he can't help but constantly spit due to the bad taste. Then he laughs and tells her it's amazing to see a girl with normal problems like not knowing how to cook. But she tells him to shut up because she must be perfect at everything. So she warns him that the next lunch will be delicious and she will make it herself. Later, we see the black dogs again on the racetrack training while Hazuki and the protagonist watch them. Maru and his group appear and tell the protagonist that it's too hot to train like this. Another small argument ensues, and Maru's group confesses their intention to win by cheating against the other faction. But when the protagonist is about to leave, Maru stops him and tells him he shouldn't participate because he caused trouble last year. Meanwhile, Hazuki's friends ask her if she's thinking about the protagonist again and tell her about the prize the best player receives. Apparently, whoever is crowned the best player has the right to choose who they dance with at the festival, and they suggest Hazuki choose the protagonist. He then turns to the girl, and she asks him to accept Hazuki as his dance partner if she is chosen as the best player. The protagonist doesn't imagine anything romantic, so he agrees to dance with Hazuki if that's what she wants. But she tells him it has nothing to do with the festival's spell, which guarantees your future with the person you dance with. Then she leaves angrily with her friends for meddling. So the protagonist also leaves, not understanding what she meant by that. A while later, he comes across a group of white cats training, led by Scott, shouting a slogan that mocks the black dogs. Scott's plan is to be the best and dance with Persia to be together forever. But then the protagonist steps on his head and they start arguing until he tries to punch Scott. A mysterious blonde girl stops his punch with a single hand. This is the first appearance of Abby and Somali, two white cats. Somali says they are a couple, and Abby has been chosen as the most handsome boy in the academy, although the protagonist doesn't recognize him. Despite this, Abby tells Somali they are not dating and asks Persia to go out with him if he is chosen as the best player at the festival. But Persia responds by pushing his hand away and telling him she finds frivolous people like him disgusting. As Abby leaves, he notices that Scott and the protagonist are looking at him with hatred. Then, Somali and Abby leave, and the others return to their tasks. Later that night, the protagonist is outside the black dog's house when he receives an arrow with a message from Persia. She asks him to meet her the next morning to practice for the three-legged race for the festival. At this, the protagonist gets excited and spends the whole night unable to stop shouting with excitement. The next morning, Persia and he meet on the racetrack, and she ties her leg to the protagonist's. This excites him too much because he is very close to her and can't help but look at a certain part of her body. But when she tells him she needs to be the best to impress her father, he gets serious again and decides to help her no matter what. They both start running together and finish the race without any problems. When they reach the finish line, Persia asks the protagonist if he feels more confident, and he asks what she means by that. So Persia reminds him that last year the Black Dogs lost the 100-meter race because the protagonist had a false start and didn't realize it until he had finished the race, and they had to repeat it. However, since he was already exhausted from running the previous race, he couldn't keep up the pace and run the second one. At this, Persia tells him he can be himself when he's with her, and that he can make up for what happened at this festival. Also, she tells him that if she is declared the best player, he will have to obey without question. The protagonist then asks if she would obey him if he won the position, and she clearly says yes. With that, he begins to fantasize about having control over Persia and gets ready to be the best. Finally, the first day of the sports festival arrives, and the freshmen will be the ones to start the events. But we see Abi and Somali, who don't have good intentions and plan to cheat to win at all costs. Once the tournament begins, the two academy heads appear to give a brief speech. The only thing the head of the Black Dogs manages to say is to play fair and nothing more relevant. Then we see Hasuki trip over Abi, and he starts flirting with the girl despite being from the enemy faction. Although he tries something with her, the protagonist intervenes with a kick to separate them, and then Somali hits Abi for being an adulterer. Afterwards, Persia appears and says she will prove that the white cats are better, but the protagonist is not willing to give up on having her obey him. Next, we are told that the first competition will be the tug of war, where both teams must pull a rope to drag the rival. The Black Dogs start the event with an advantage because their strength surpasses that of the white cats, but they had to contend with the terrible strength of Somali, who manages to balance the game a bit. Even so, when Abi congratulates her, Somali gets so excited that she lets go of the rope, and the Black Dogs end up winning. Then we move on to the second event, a race starring Maru and Char. He sets a trap for the princess by throwing some spikes on the ground, but she has other students carry her and avoids getting pricked. Maru gets angry with the referee for allowing that and ends up losing the race for stopping to argue with the man. The events continue, and the two teams are constantly tied until one of the last events. In this one, the teams fight to knock down an enemy pole by climbing it. But just as Persia is trying to beat the rival team, Somali jumps on her to finish toppling the rival pole and injures her. There, the referees announce that the title of Best Female Player of the festival is now between Somali and Persia. Afterwards, we see Persia on the ground, seemingly injured, but when Char approaches, she says that absolutely nothing happened. They then have a 1-hour break, and the protagonist and Persia meet secretly in a hallway. Persia tells him that her mother is in the stands, and that if she is named Best Player, she will tell her father, so she can't lose to him or anyone else. This motivates the protagonist to keep competing, and he asks if he should greet her mother, but Persia says he will do it later, and he gets excited thinking about a future together. They then resume the festival shortly after. The next event is a relay race, and this time Hasuki faces Persia. Hasuki says a few words to her rival, but she seems completely annoyed and focused on winning at all costs. The race begins, and both girls receive the baton without a problem. But shortly after, we see that Persia's clearly falls to the ground. And when everyone looks at the girl, she is lying on the ground, unable to move. The protagonist then runs towards her, but at that moment, Char stops him and says he will cause a big stir if he interferes. Meanwhile, Scott and the other white cats approach to help Persia, but she says she just tripped. Suddenly, Abi appears there with his group and tells her she has disappointed everyone and has clearly ruined the festival. They then take Persia to the infirmary, and we see that her leg is in very bad shape. Outside, Char tells the protagonist what happened and reveals that she saw Somali step on Persia in the previous event. The princess also tells him that it all seems like a plan by Abi to eliminate a part of the white cats, and that Somali just obeys him, but she has no proof to demonstrate it. And if they say it was an accident, they can't do anything to dispute it. Afterwards, the protagonist enters the room and asks Persia to come and watch the last game, because he plans to drag Abi through the mud. Back on the field, we see the two teams preparing for a chicken fight. The protagonist asks Maru to let him be on top of the tower, but he refuses to move if he has to be the horse. The event begins with Hasuki stealing many ribbons from the white cats, but soon her teammates fall and her ribbon is stolen. Little by little, the Black Dogs begin to fall to the ground as if by magic, and Abi smiles, seeing his plan is working. Only Maru and the protagonist are left, forming a tower against several groups of white cats, although the former doesn't want to cooperate. At that moment, Persia, disguised as Juliet, shouts to encourage them clearly from the stands, and the two react together. They get rid of several white cats and reach Abi. There, Maru reveals that he knows he used sleeping pills in the drinks because he got the boy in charge of distributing them to confess. And that's why the black dogs have fallen. Somali tries to kick Maru in the face, but they stop her, and the protagonist realizes she has sharp spikes on her soul, and that's what she used to injure Persia when she stepped on her before. So he tells her that her tricks are outdated. Somali becomes enraged, remembering everything that happened when he was little for not being particularly handsome or strong, and attacks the protagonist with a punch to the face that causes no damage. And he ends up throwing him into the stands with a single hand. The referee is about to announce the victory of the black dogs when the protagonist interrupts him and asks to fight Persia. She smiles, takes off her wig, and musters her strength to fight the protagonist. The final battle will be between Persia and the protagonist to decide which of the two teams wins the festival. The duel between them begins, and they exchange many blows while trying to snatch the ribbon from each other's arm. Seeing Persia's determination, the Westerners in the stands begin to cheer for and support her again. The protagonist laughs at how easily they change their minds and continues to fight Persia, although she resists the pain. Finally, they both lunge at each other with force, but the protagonist ends up grabbing Persia's breast instead of the ribbon, like a true fan of Eki. At this, she gets embarrassed, and the protagonist gets so excited that he ends up falling with a nosebleed. Thus, the victory is given to the white cats, and the black dogs decide to strip the protagonist of his leader title for being defeated by a breast and being the shame of the faction. Something he accepts without saying a word because there's nothing he can do. At night, they all celebrate with a party, but Scott can't find Persia anywhere and ends up being kidnapped by Char, as she had told him she would punish him if they lost their event. Outside, the protagonist reflects on what happened when Persia appears there and asks him if he knows the sports festival spell. He denies it, and she then asks him to dance together. But the protagonist doesn't know how the Westerners dance. Persia asks him to dance as they do in Tour, and he obeys, showing her the strange and funny steps they do. While Persia remembers everything he has done for her and how he has protected her, she thanks him, calling him by his full name. This embarrasses the protagonist a bit, and he says it's nothing. And then the two continue dancing in the Tour style. The next morning, the Academy's prefects meet to discuss what happened at the sports festival. The Black Dog's side reproaches the other for the serious cheating Abi did for his faction, but they respond that he has already lost his popularity and they shouldn't be so tense over something so simple. Then one of the prefects asks the White Cats to control their students to avoid such cheating and problems, and they respond that the others should better control the protagonist, to which they ask if they want to start a war right there. Meanwhile, we see the protagonist sick in bed while Hazuki takes care of him and wonders if it's okay to keep loving him. At that moment, other students appear and take Hazuki away because a fight is breaking out outside, and she is clearly the leader. Now the protagonist starts to remember being a child and getting sick with a fever that affected his heart. Then he hears Persia's voice, and when he opens his eyes, he sees her there too and thinks it's a dream. He starts saying and doing strange things, like calling her his little princess or asking her to clean his ears. Then, when Persia gives him a few good slaps to stop his fantasizing, he realizes this is all real, and she tells him she disguised herself as Julio to sneak in and take care of him a bit, as she wants to return the favor for the sports festival. A while later, Persia finds a magazine of naked girls in the room, and the protagonist tries to explain it's not his, but she calls him a pervert and goes out to get something to eat and drink for him. After wandering around the Black Dog's house, Persia gets an apple and something hot to drink, although she runs into Maru in one of the hallways, and he starts asking her uncomfortable questions about who she is or what year she's in, and even eats the apple when she says it's for the protagonist. So Persia throws the hot water at him and runs away. She looks for a place to hide from Maru and slips into a large open room with the bad luck that it turns out to be a kind of hot spring for the girls, and upon seeing a boy in the bath, they all call for help. A while later, Persia arrives at the protagonist's room, whining and saying that the Black Dog's house is very scary. As her clothes are soaked from entering the girl's bath, the protagonist lends her his clothes, although he gets very nervous seeing her like that. Suddenly, Kohitsuji knocks on the door and asks for his erotic magazine, but since he doesn't answer, he thinks he's asleep and leaves. Then we see that Persia has gotten under the protagonist's covers, and he is dying of a fever, though not exactly from the illness. While resting, the protagonist has a dream where he remembers a song his mother used to sing to him when he was little and very sick. But when he opens his eyes, he realizes that Persia is singing the same song and asks her why she knows it. She replies that it's a song from the West and that her father used to sing it at night when she was little. Suddenly, Persia notices the protagonist's fever is gone and he thanks her for coming to take care of him. But Persia replies that it wasn't just for that. She also wanted to see him. And then his fever spikes again, and he faints. On another note, for a moment we see two black dog prefects in a room, and one of them is looking at a photo of the protagonist while telling her sister she needs to keep an eye on him. The next morning, some students are talking in the library when they realize two prefects are there. One of them tells the other, named Teria, that she has found what she was looking for and leaves. Meanwhile, the students from before watch them leave and explain that they are something like teachers and you have to be careful with them. Later, the prefects tell their leader, named Airu, what they heard from the girls in the library and that there will be a festival near the academy soon, so they think he should oversee it. But Airu tells them he has a lot of work and that they should do it, as it's part of their duties. Meanwhile, we see the protagonist talking with Persia in secret, and he suggests they go to the harvest festival that will be held on the other side of the lake. She agrees but says she'll have to go with her housemates because she prefers not to use the Julio disguise for now. However, since the protagonist gets very sad, she ends up promising to sneak away to watch the fireworks. Once Persia leaves, the protagonist hears something strange in a tree, and suddenly one of the prefects we saw before, named Gakkou, falls out. The protagonist doesn't recognize who it is, and she asks him to let her go because he is clearly touching her chest. But he says he didn't realize, and the girl bites him, very angry for messing with her body. Suddenly, Teria falls from another tree to save her, and they both clearly tell the protagonist they are not just any students, although he still doesn't understand what's happening. At that moment, Hasuki appears, and the protagonist tells her he was fighting with those two brats. But his friend, upon seeing them, bows and asks the protagonist to show respect too because they are prefects. To which he replies that he won't obey people like them. Then one of the twins asks the protagonist what he was doing hiding under a bench, and he thinks she has discovered their relationship. So, to get out of it, he says he was talking to his friends, the ants, and Hasuki gets a little worried about him and asks if he needs friends. But the prefects don't quite believe the story the protagonist is telling them. A while later, the protagonist returns to his room and finds the twins waiting inside. One of them finds the rosary Persia gave him and asks, what is someone from Tua doing with that? The protagonist lunges at Teria to get it back and then escapes, blocking the entrance with wooden planks. Still, the twins manage to get out without a problem and chase him until the protagonist manages to lose them. Teria then looks at the girls going to the festival with pity, and her sister tells her it's better if they go as they need to watch him. Once at the festival, the twins continue to look for the protagonist while keeping an eye on the place, but Teria seems quite distracted and keeps looking at other students having fun together. Then, Teria and Kochu see the protagonist walking straight towards them, lost in his thoughts, very happy and distracted. The prefects stop him and tell him they have the right to investigate any black dog, but the protagonist escapes again. Meanwhile, we see Maru and his group also strolling through the festival, although he isn't having fun and is in a bad mood the whole time. Persia manages to distract her companions thanks to Char and sneaks away to look for the protagonist as well. So they both meet in the nearby forest, but he asks her to hide because the prefects are still looking for him. For a good while, Persia and the protagonist flee from the twins by land, sea and air until they end up trapped in a barrel together. For his part, Maru decides to leave, but when he sees his friends' concern for him, he goes back to them and they get on a ride. Back in the barrel, the protagonist is very nervous about having Persia there and doesn't know how to get out. Meanwhile, Kochu and Teria continue to search for him because they are suspicious of his attitude after finding the rosary in his room. At that moment, two men start fighting in the middle of the festival, bothering the rest of the civilians. So the prefects ask them to stop once and for all, but the men decide to attack them. Teria immobilizes one by throwing a net at him from the air, and Kochu takes down the other with a kind of strange powder she clearly blows at them. Both are knocked out, and the crowd starts applauding the prefects. But at that moment, someone makes a comment referring to them not being normal people, and they both become sad. The protagonist sees this from the barrel and asks Persia to wait a moment. The twins are about to leave when the protagonist shoots a rubber ball at them and challenges them to beat him in several games, or else he will destroy one of the festival stalls. So the girls have no choice but to accept. For a while, the three students play tag, see who can eat the fastest, or shoot targets best. In the end, he tells them they lost, and that if they want to play with someone again, they can count on him. Teria and Kochu are embarrassed because they had a really good time, despite being prefects and not being able to do those things. The protagonist pats their heads and tells them to let themselves have fun from time to time. They are still girls. They leave, and just as the protagonist walks away to look for Persia, the fireworks start, so they don't make it in time. When the protagonist opens the barrel, Persia is still there and pretends to be angry with him. But then she tells him that not only did she see the fireworks through a hole, but he did it for the twins. They both agree to watch the next fireworks together, and the protagonist then takes out some sparklers to light with her. Persia tells him she really likes these handheld fireworks because they are simple like him, and so they end their night together. Meanwhile, at the academy, Kochu and Teria talk about how much fun they had thanks to the protagonist and wonder if he will run for seasonal prefect later on. Then, we see Ayaru signing some documents with a very serious look, and on the signature, we see he has the same last name as the protagonist. Another night, we see Cha is very excited because it's almost Persia's birthday. The moment she comes out of the bathroom, Cha tells her she's very happy about how great her birthday party will be. But then Persia says there's a favor she wants to ask him for that day, although we are not shown what she asked. It's something that doesn't please her friend Char at all for some reason. The next morning, the protagonist is also very happy, marking Persia's birthday on his calendar, when suddenly Kochu appears on his shoulder and scares him to death. Although it turns out Teria has been hiding there all night. The twins tell him they have an errand to run in town and they'd rather not go, but the protagonist offers to do it for them so he can buy a gift for Persia on the way. With that, he gets a permit to leave the academy and soon finds a shop with a perfect white cat for her. Just as he grabs it, Char also tries to take the cat until they break it fighting over it. At that moment, a police officer approaches and tells Char it's not safe there, as there are some Tua radicals in this city. But Char enters a shop and disguises the protagonist in white cat clothes and tells the officer he is her bodyguard. Then they both hide in an alley, and the protagonist tells Char he has no intention of being her protector. The princess blackmails the protagonist, telling him she knows exactly what his girlfriend wants and that it would be a disappointment if the first gift he gives her is something she doesn't like. So the protagonist agrees to accompany her. The first stop they make is a lingerie store. And although at first the protagonist refuses to cooperate in choosing these things, he ends up being a great help to Char, and they agree on how they would like Persia to look and what would suit her to wear. A while later, they are walking down Dahlia Street, arguing as usual, until it starts to rain heavily. Meanwhile, at the academy, the twins wonder what the protagonist was supposed to do and why he had a rosary again. But at that moment, Iru appears behind them and asks what they are talking about. On the other hand, Shah and the protagonist manage to take shelter from the rain, and there the princess provokes him to test Persia's fidelity. The protagonist gets angry at her for suggesting indecent things, even as a joke, and gives her a light tap on the forehead with his finger to scold her. After this, Shah is surprised and tells him he's fired as a bodyguard and apologizes for getting him into that mess. Once she leaves, Char sees two children running towards their mother, who scolds one of them as they approach. This makes her remember that when she was little, no one scolded her, and they always fulfilled her whims. Until one day, Persia scolded her for being so selfish, which surprised her a lot, but she knew she was trying to help her as a friend. Remembering this, Char thinks she didn't expect to be scolded by the protagonist as well. And at that moment, two radicals appear and grab her. One of the men holds her, while the other asks what a little princess from the west is doing in that place, as, according to him, Dahlia Street is their group's property. Char kicks the one holding her and manages to break free. Suddenly, the protagonist appears and asks what's going on, but the man, seeing he's a black dog, thinks he will help him with the girl. The protagonist then replies that he's not from his group, but is Princess Char's bodyguard, and punches him against the wall. Char gets annoyed and asks why he helped her if she wasn't in danger, to which the protagonist replies that he did it for Persia, because if something happened to her best friend, she would be very sad, and he doesn't want to see her make that face. At this, Char laughs and says he's an even bigger idiot than she is. Later, they talk calmly in another place. There, Char confesses that she has always been jealous of him because Persia shows him a side of her that she doesn't know, and it was very painful and frustrating to be around him. The protagonist tries to comfort her, but also feels sorry for the situation. In the end, Char gives him a bag with a gift for Persia and tells him to also find one on his own, as a thank you for accompanying her. When Char walks away, he opens the gift and realizes she has given him a bra to use with Persia when he has the chance. Later, the protagonist arrives at the academy, and before entering, he receives an arrow with a message from Persia asking him to meet her in the library right now, which he does immediately. There, Persia suggests they spend her birthday together, and the protagonist agrees, but she asks that they celebrate normally, and not like all the previous years, where they sneak into the White Cat's house and attack students with cakes. Then the protagonist asks her what she wants as a gift, and she shyly replies that she wants a pair of accessories. Afterwards, he returns to his room but finds Hasuki at his door. He asks what's wrong, and when he looks inside, he sees Airu along with Kochu and Teria, who asks where he's coming from at this hour. There, we learn that Prefect Airu is actually the protagonist's older brother. Airu asks him where he got the rosary he has, and Hasuki intervenes, saying it's a gift for her. But then Airu pulls out the white bra with cat drawings that Char gave him for Persia, and Hasuki is left speechless. Then Airu tells him that the West and Tua have a very tense relationship at the moment, which could erupt at any time. So if the protagonist has a relationship with a woman from the enemy faction, he would be accused of treason. He replies that he has no interest in anyone from the West and asks him to please believe him. But at this, Airu grabs him by the collar of his uniform and holds him in the air, accusing him of having had to cover for him on many occasions for being a troublemaker. At this, Teria throws herself into the protagonist's arms and clings to him despite Airu's orders. Kochu climbs onto Airu's shoulder and asks them not to fight, or she will have to punish him since this is still a school. However, Airu drops his brother and warns him that he will be under surveillance this week. Meanwhile, we see Persia has managed to make perfect cookies thanks to her hard work and gives some to Scott and Shah. But moments later, the prefects appear, followed by the protagonist. During the walk, Kochu asks the protagonist if he doesn't get along with his brother, but Teria tells her it's better not to ask such things. Then, Kochu explains to the protagonist that Airu often gets very angry with him, that is, the representative of the white cats, but he is normally a kind person. Just then, a paper airplane hits Airu, and some children appear. Realizing he's a prefect, they both get scared, but all Airu does is improve their airplane and asks them to play far away. So Kochu shows the protagonist that Airu can also be a kind person, although she says it's only with students. At that, the protagonist remembers that his brother has always been very hard on him, to the point of giving him a trauma. When they were little, he would always hit him for not doing things right, and even controlled him when he went to the bathroom. Shortly after, we see the protagonist walking behind his older brother, and Persia walks past him without him being able to do anything but look at her. The next day, Airu takes his brother, and they train with swords, while Hasuki, Maru, and his group watch him take blows. Everyone thinks the protagonist is really being destroyed by his older brother. But later, when Hasuki helps the protagonist walk, he confesses to her that he is only trying to make his brother lower his guard. And then he reveals his true intentions, to go to Persia's birthday without his brother finding out, because he seems subjected to his will. Hasuki worries and warns him that he will be expelled from the academy if they find out, something she does not want at all. But the protagonist gives her his word that it won't happen and goes to wash up. Just then, Persia appears and asks Hasuki what she means by him possibly being expelled. Later that night, we see the protagonist sneaking out of the academy to see Persia, thinking his brother is already asleep. But Airu immediately stops him and reveals he knew he was up to something by the look in his eyes. During the sword duel, the prefect orders him to return, but for the first time, the protagonist refuses to obey his brother. Seeing this, Airu asks if he intends to confront him, and they both start to fight. After a couple of blows to the stomach and face, the protagonist falls defeated, and Airu locks him in a shed to reflect. But then, we see the twins unlock the door so the protagonist can get out, although he is badly injured. Thus, we discover that he had planned everything, as he knew he couldn't leave without Airu finding out, and that he would lock him up as he did when they were kids. So he asked the twins for help, and Teria agreed, convinced that a prefect's job was to help students, so her sister Kochu also agreed to the protagonist's request upon seeing her sister so devoted to him. Once free, the protagonist starts running towards the White Cat's house, but we see him gradually getting dizzy and losing strength. When he least expects it, he collapses on the ground, but just then, Persia appears to catch him before he gets hurt more. He asks what she's doing there, and Persia replies that she knows about his brother and the suspicions he had about their relationship. So she was trying to get to him before it was too late, but she didn't make it. The protagonist tells her not to worry and that the expulsion was just a joke, but Persia knows that their relationship has caused him a lot of harm. He then says he doesn't have the gift yet, but she rejects it and says that all she wanted was to be with him and for him to be okay. So Persia apologizes for not being able to protect him and cries while hugging him on the ground. The next morning, Scott and the White Cats are preparing in the garden for Persia's birthday, but they are interrupted by the protagonist with a kick, who is looking for Persia after what happened the night before. When she sees him, she tells Char she forgot something and runs off, although he notices and chases her. The protagonist manages to corner Persia as she is avoiding him and tells her it's the best time to talk because Airu is in class. However, Persia says she doesn't want to talk to him and pushes him, making him fall on his back, and then she runs away. Hasuki accompanies the protagonist to the infirmary because he is really down after what happened with Persia and suggests they skip classes. They go together to the academy's game room and the protagonist asks if it's okay for someone as smart as her to skip classes. To which Hasuki replies that she is not as responsible as he thinks and suggests they play pool. The protagonist has never tried this game, so Hasuki has to teach him from scratch. However, when he tries to hit a ball with the cue, he ends up hitting Hasuki in the chest and they leave a while later. Afterwards, his friend suggests they go to the stable to play with the sheep, and there the protagonist finds that they too run away from him. So Hasuki suggests he give them something to eat, but when she takes out the food, the sheep pounce on her, trapping her. Lastly, they go to a tower at the academy to see the view from there, and that seems to cheer the protagonist up a bit. But he leans on one of the walls and it breaks away, causing her to nearly fall into the void. The protagonist grabs her by the waist and Hasuki gets so excited she ends up hitting her head against the wall to calm down. Since the place isn't very safe, the protagonist tells her it would be better to leave, and Hasuki says it would be nice to come back someday. Hearing this, the protagonist remembers Persia's words from their first date when she asked to have another one sometime. Meanwhile, we see Persia getting ready for her party, looking very sad, and just then Shar appears. She asks her friend if the cookies on a table are the ones she was going to give the protagonist the night before, but Persia grabs the bag of cookies and says they are actually for her. And that's when Char realizes something has happened. Seeing Persia's sad face, Shar asks her to tell her what happened, and she laments having hurt the protagonist. Later, we see Hasuki and the protagonist at the academy entrance, and he tells her he had a great time and is feeling better. But Hasuki asks him not to lie because they've known each other for a long time and she knows he's not okay. At this, Hasuki starts to cry and tells him it's frustrating to know she's not enough for him, which the protagonist completely denies. Realizing he's worrying his friend, he hits himself to give some vitality to his weak body. At this, Hasuki laughs and the protagonist smiles back at her. Just at that moment, Shar appears at the top of a tree and falls next to them to give the protagonist the cookies that Persia couldn't give him the night before. She says she has to go to her friend's birthday and won't answer any questions, so she leaves him the gift and clearly leaves. The protagonist opens the bag and quickly tries the cookies. Seeing how good they are, he starts to cry with emotion, remembering that Persia was very bad at cooking and it seems she has been practicing for him all this time. Then Hasuki tells him she doesn't want to see him in danger, but she also can't stand to see him so sad, so she encourages him to keep smiling. He fills with determination, removes the bandage from his cheek, and decides to go to Persia's birthday no matter what. Later, we see Persia asking the representative of the white cats for help when a student interrupts and tells her that some black dogs have invaded their house and are prepared to ruin the birthday. So we see that the protagonist has crashed the party and has brought a few companions with cakes to throw at the students. Scott and his group then begin to confront the black dogs, among whom is also Hasuki. The protagonist separates from them to look for Persia, with 2 cakes in hand as an excuse, and his plan is to get her out of there and celebrate together. But when he reaches a room, Somali falls on top of him and pins him down. Then Abby appears, looking very dirty and neglected, and we discover that since his dirty tricks at the sports festival were exposed, he has been living in a cabin in the yard and plans to regain his reputation by catching the protagonist with Somali's help. But seeing this, the protagonist tells Somali that Abby is jealous of the way she is clearly hugging him and to look at his angry face. So she lets go of the protagonist and throws herself into Abby's arms. In this way, the protagonist frees himself from the two and continues to search for Persia through the building until he is surrounded by white cats. At that moment, he disappears and the students split up to look for him. It turns out that someone has helped the protagonist, and it is Kite, the representative of the white cats, a very strange boy who makes the protagonist uncomfortable with his jokes. He thanks both of them for their help, and they climb down from the ventilation duct, but at that moment, Kite proposes a game. He must meet Persia on the 4th floor before the others find out they are there. However, at that moment, Prefect Seba appears with Scott and other white cats to stop the protagonist. Seeing that they have been caught, Kite tells him he has no choice but to fulfill his role as representative instead of playing around. Meanwhile, we see that Persia is locked on the 4th floor, and the door is blocked because Kite locked her in when she went to ask for his help. There, she remembers what the protagonist said the night before. that he wanted to protect and save her before something bad happened. So Persia opens the window and looks outside for a way out to help him. Back with the protagonist, he is cornered by Prefect Kite and begins to fight in front of the other white cats. The protagonist tries to hit him, but Kite's strength is greater than he expected and quite different from his brother's. At one point, he hears something through the window behind him and sets a trap for Kite. He throws part of his uniform at the prefect and, in the process, puts a belt around his legs so he can't move. Then the protagonist jumps out the window from the 3rd floor while everyone watches in horror. But he had heard Persia earlier and only jumped because he knew she was nearby to help him. Persia grabs his hand as soon as he jumps and pulls him up to the balcony where she was waiting to save him. The prefects split up and decide to go look for the protagonist again, while he finally reunites with his beloved. Elsewhere, we see Kochu and Teria informing Iru that several Black Dog students are causing a lot of trouble. He asks them what they mean, and the twins explain that a group has gone to ruin Persia's birthday. Hearing this, Iru remembers the protagonist's rosary and the date marked on the calendar in his room and prepares to go there. Meanwhile, on the balcony, the protagonist asks Persia how she got to him, and she says she walked along the edge of the room's window looking for a way out. When she tells him this, the protagonist scolds her for doing something so dangerous, but Persia gets upset because he has also done things like that for her. Then the protagonist wishes her a happy birthday, taking advantage of the fact that they are finally together and free from the other students. And Persia asks him in anguish if he did all this just to be able to congratulate her on her special day. She confesses that she did want to see him and was very happy when she found out he was there, but she didn't want to hurt him anymore. Finally, Persia tells the protagonist that she loves him very much and hugs him, crying. This makes him cry and get very emotional too. Persia leans on his shoulder and thanks him for breaking the barrier that separates their nations so easily to be together again. In the end, she understands that they can face problems as one and overcome them, and thus be together from now on. A while later, we see Iru arriving at the White Cat's dorms and subduing all the students. Before leaving to look for the protagonist, he asks Hasuki to watch the rest of his group, and she accepts his orders. But at that moment, Tosa and Kohitsuji try to sneak out of the building and are stopped by Rex, a supermuscular prefect wearing a female uniform. He challenges them to a duel to see who is more adorable to let them leave. Both friends fail, so they get punched in the face and hide behind Hasuki. Seeing this, Maru, who had been hiding outside watching his friends, throws a cake at Rex and steps in. But the prefect, seeing how much he cares for his group, tells Maru that he has been defeated and surrenders to him. Suddenly, the protagonist appears with Persia to fight in front of all the students, each with a cake. They both start running and hit each other in the face with the cake at the same time, making the others believe they are fighting. The protagonist says it was a draw and that he has fulfilled his mission to disrupt Persia's birthday, so they can leave now. However, as the Black Dogs are about to leave, Iru appears and confronts his brother. The protagonist tells him he was just there throwing cakes and that there is no rule prohibiting them from entering the White Cat's house. Iru ignores all this and seriously asks the protagonist if the person he has been dating all this time is Persia. To this, she replies that it's an insult for him to accuse her of dating someone from the enemy faction without proof. But Iru talks about the rosary he found in the protagonist's room and the date marked on his calendar, her birthday. At this, Persia defends herself by saying this is circumstantial and proves absolutely nothing, to which Iru counters with another piece of evidence and shows the white bra from Char that he gave to the protagonist to give to Persia. Everyone is scandalized, and Persia asks the protagonist whose garment that is, but he makes excuses trying to fix the matter. Suddenly, Kite appears and tells Iru that what he is doing can be classified as harassment, to which the prefect responds to get lost, and this annoys Kite, who tells him that he is the one in someone else's house causing trouble, so he should be the one to get lost. Then Kite intervenes and says before everyone that he wants to hear what explanation Persia has for all this. The students begin to doubt both of them and demand an explanation beyond them not being traitors, but neither of them can answer. So Kite and Iru decide to take charge of their respective sides. The protagonist looks at Persia desperately, wondering if their relationship will end like this after everything they've overcome. Suddenly, Persia throws a real sword to the protagonist and places it in front of him, challenging him to a fight. She explains that her honor is the most important thing in her life and it has been questioned, so they will clearly settle it on the battlefield. The students get scared when they see they are real swords, and the protagonist also fears this fight as one of them will get hurt. Suddenly, Persia begins to attack with direct blows that are clearly intended to harm the protagonist. but he only defends himself and hesitates about what he's doing to resolve the conflict until Persia calls him a coward and tells him to stop mocking her because she intends to hurt and be hurt. She then asks what he is willing to do, and the protagonist realizes they must settle it right now. So he laughs and faces Persia as she asked, ready to end it once and for all. After this, they both lunge at each other and their swords clash in the air, each deflecting towards the other's neck. Both sides scream upon seeing the scene and rush forward, worried about Persia and the protagonist, although in the end, we see it all fades away. A while later, Persia and the protagonist are in the infirmary, lying in beds while their friends wait outside. They all talk about the fight and convince themselves that it's impossible for them to be dating if they fought like that. When everyone moves away from the door, the protagonist and Persia sit up in their beds, relieved and happy to have successfully deceived everyone. They both take out the other's rosary that they were carrying during the fight, and we realize both are broken. It is then revealed that Persia's plan was to signal the protagonist by pointing to the rosary with her finger to indicate where to strike. When Iru and Kite intervened in the fight to stop them, they hadn't actually hurt each other. The protagonist apologizes to Persia for breaking the first gift she gave him and finally gives her his real birthday present. He kneels down to take out a pair of matching rings he bought for them to wear. Then the protagonist tells her he will become a prefect to change the school and asks her to wait for him so they can wear the rings without any problem in the future. Persia throws herself into his arms, very happy, and tells him she will wait as long as necessary because he is her boyfriend and she wants him to show how great he can be. Though overwhelmed by so much affection, he faints from happiness. Later, we see the academy heads demanding explanations from Kite and Iru about what is happening. They take responsibility and tell them they have punished Persia and the protagonist with a week of confinement in their rooms. Sometime later, the couple is at the lake, using a boat so they won't be seen. There, Persia asks him if he really plans to become a prefect, and he replies that his brother has not opposed his request, but that he will start as an errand boy to get closer to them and learn more. For a moment, we see the protagonist serving kochu and teria, and they are delighted to have him all to themselves for days. Back on the lake, Persia puts the ring on the protagonist. She puts hers on as well and tries to say something but decides to stay quiet. He tries to get her to finish the sentence, but Persia refuses, and in the end, he falls out of the boat once again. Since he can't swim, he asks Persia for help, and she offers him her hand at that moment. They look at each other and declare that in the future, no one will stop them, and they can call each other Romeo and Juliet, or as the anime literally says, Romeo and Juliet. And so the anime ends.